Good morning, dear students of Junior 5. Today we have another lesson of our readers for this term, and it's called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. We stopped last time at chapter 9, where things were looking mysterious, especially after Dr. Lanyon's strange death and how Dr. Jekyll was shut in his room for a long time and he refuses to see anyone, especially Mr. Utterson, who kept trying to visit him without any use. Okay, so let's read more into our story and solve the mystery.
The last night. Mr. Utterson was sitting alone one evening after dinner when Poole arrived at his house. The lawyer was surprised to see him. "Hello, Poole," he said. "What is this visit about?" And then, when he looked again at Dr. Jekyll's servant, he continued, "What's the matter? Is the doctor ill?" "Mr. Utterson," Poole said, "something is terribly wrong." "Sit down and tell me about it," said the lawyer. "Thank you, sir," said Poole. "Where is the doctor?" asked Utterson. "Well, sir, that's the trouble," said Poole. "You know that he shuts himself in the room above the workroom. But something's wrong, terribly wrong. I'm afraid, Mr. Utterson. I've been afraid for a week now. I had to come and see you tonight." Utterson said, "What do you mean? What are you afraid of, Poole?" "I can't say, sir," said Poole. "But will you come with me? Please, sir, please, and see with your own eyes?" Mr. Utterson's only answer was to get his hat and coat. Then the two men left the house. It was a wild, cold night in March, and there were no people in the streets. The two men walked quickly and in silence. When they reached Dr. Jekyll's front door, Poole knocked in a special way, and a voice from inside asked, "Is that you, Mr. Poole?" "It's all right," answered Poole. "You can open the door. It's me, Poole." The door opened, and all Dr. Jekyll's servants were waiting inside. When they saw Mr. Utterson, one cried, "Thank God, it's Mr. Utterson." "Why are you all here?" Utterson wanted to know. "They're all afraid," said Poole. "Will you come with me, sir? Come as quietly as you can, Mr. Utterson. I want you to hear, but I don't want him to hear you." And he walked out to the courtyard at the back of the house. Utterson followed him. "One other thing, sir," Poole said. "If he asks you to go in, don't go, sir, please." They went through the workroom to the bottom of the stairs. Here, Poole spoke quietly to Mr. Utterson. "Stand on one side and listen," he said. Then he went up the stairs and knocked on the door of the room above. "Mr. Utterson is asking to see you, sir," Poole called. An angry voice came from the other side of the door. "I can't see anyone." "Thank you, sir," said Poole. He took Mr. Utterson back to the house. "Sir," he said, looking into the lawyer's eyes, "was that the doctor's voice?" "It seems to be greatly changed," Utterson replied. "Changed?" said Poole. "I have been here in Dr. Jekyll's house for 20 years, and I know his voice.
That isn't it. No, sir. The doctor is dead. He was killed a week ago when we heard him cry to God. But who is in there now, Mr. Utterson? And why does he stay there? That's what I want to know.
This is a strange story, Poole, said Utterson. But if Dr. Jekyll was murdered, why does the murderer stay there? There is no good reason for that.
No, there's no good reason, Poole agreed. But I must tell you more. All this week, the person or thing in that room has cried day and night for some sort of medicine, and he can't get what he wants. In the past, Dr. Jekyll sometimes wrote his orders on a piece of paper and threw it on the stairs. For a week we've had only orders and a closed door. Orders for meals, but usually orders for a chemical. I took these orders to every chemist in London, and every time I brought the chemical back, there was another paper. It told me to take the chemical back. It wasn't right. It told me to try another chemist. I don't know what the chemical is for, Mr. Utterson, but I know that the person in that room wants it very badly.
Do you have any of those papers, Poole? Asked Mr. Utterson.
Yes, sir, said Poole.
And took out a note. Then he gave it to Utterson.
The man at Moore and Company was very angry, and he threw this one back at me. I kept it.
Utterson read the note. Moore and Company. You have sent me a chemical which is useless to me. In the year 1875, I bought a large amount of this chemical from you. Now I must ask you to make a very careful search. If you have any of this old, good chemical, please send it to me immediately. The cost does not matter. This is very important. Then came the last sentence. The writer ended, God help me. Please find me some of the old chemical. Henry Jekyll. It does seem to be Dr. Jekyll's writing, said Mr. Utterson.
Yes, said Poole. But it isn't Dr. Jekyll up there. I know, because I've seen him.
You've seen him? Said the lawyer.
Yes, sir, said Poole.
When?
I came suddenly into the workroom from the garden, and he was there in front of me, said Poole. He probably came down secretly into the workroom to look for this chemical. His face was covered, and he was searching in the boxes in the workroom like a madman.
Did he see you? Asked the lawyer.
Yes, sir, replied Poole.
What happened? Asked Utterson.
When he saw me, he gave a cry. Then he ran up the stairs to the room above, said Poole. This person's face was covered, but it wasn't the doctor.
His face was covered, you say, said Utterson. Perhaps he is hurt. Perhaps he covers it because he does not want to shock his friends.
No, sir, said Poole. Dr. Jekyll is a tall, strong man. This man was small, and when I saw him, I felt sick.
Mr. Utterson looked at the frightened servant. We must speak honestly, Poole, he said. This person with the covered face, do you know who it was?
You mean, was it Mr. Hyde? Yes, sir, I think it was, said Poole. He gave you the feeling that he was all evil.
I know that feeling, said the lawyer. Now listen, Poole. I will have to break down the door of the room above the workroom.
Oh, sir, Poole cried, I am very glad to hear you say that. I'll come with you. We'll do it together. There's an axe and a piece of metal in the workroom.
This will be dangerous, said Utterson.
I know that, sir, said Poole.
They sent 2 men servants to watch the door into the narrow street. Poole and I are going to break into the room above the workroom, Utterson told them. You must guard the door and stop anybody escaping. Take some big sticks to protect yourselves. Then Mr. Utterson and Poole went to the door of the room. They listened. Somebody was walking up and down inside. Jekyll, cried Utterson loudly, I must see you. The walking stopped, but there was no answer. If you don't open the door, called the lawyer, we'll break it down. I must see you.
Utterson,
they heard from the other side of the door.
Have pity on me.
That's not Jekyll's voice, said Utterson. It's Hyde's. The door must come down. It was a very well-made door, and very strong. They had to use the axe many times before they could break the lock. They opened the door. The 2 men looked into the room. It looked like other rooms, but there were cupboards full of chemicals and tables for scientific work. There was a good warm fire burning in the fireplace. A desk drawer was open, and some papers were lying on the top. But on the floor, right in the middle of the room, was the body of a man. The 2 men hurried across to it and turned it over onto its back. The face was Edward Hyde's. He was dressed in clothes that were too big for him, but the clothes were the right size for Dr. Jekyll. There was a broken glass in his hand, and a strong smell came from it. He was dead. I'm afraid that we have arrived too late, Mr. Utterson said. Hyde has killed himself. Now we can only look for the body of Dr. Jekyll. They searched the house, but they could not find the body. The door into the narrow street was locked, and the broken key was on the floor inside the door. I don't understand this, Poole, said Mr. Utterson. Let's go back upstairs. They went back to the room and to the body of Mr. Hyde. On one table there were small piles of some sort of white chemical on glass plates.
That's the chemical which he sent me out for, Poole said.
For an experiment, said Utterson. There was a large envelope on the desk. The name Mr. Utterson was written on it in Dr. Jekyll's handwriting. The lawyer opened it. 3 things fell out. The thing was a new will. Like Dr. Jekyll's first will, it spoke of his death or disappearance. But it was not Edward Hyde who now received everything. The lawyer was very surprised to read the name John Utterson. Utterson looked at Poole, then back at the papers, then at the body on the floor. I don't understand this, he said. Hyde has been here all this time. He saw this new will, and he had no reason to like me. My name is on the paper in place of his. I feel sure that he was very angry about that. But he hasn't destroyed the will. It is very strange. He picked up the next paper. It was a short note in the doctor's handwriting, and the date was at the top.
Poole, he cried.
What is it? Said Poole. Mr. Utterson was excited. Dr. Jekyll was here and alive today, he said. He is still alive, because no murderer could hide a body so quickly.
Surely he has escaped. But why? How? And where did he go? There are a lot of questions here without answers. If we tell people about this death, perhaps we will make trouble for the doctor. Oh, we must be very careful, Poole. Why don't you read the note, sir? Asked Poole. Because I'm afraid, replied the lawyer. I hope that I have no reason to be afraid, but— Please read it, sir, said Poole. So Utterson looked at the note. My dear Utterson, when this is in your hands, my disappearance will be a fact. I don't know how it will happen. I do know that it will happen soon. So please go. Read the paper that Lanyon gave you, and then, if you want to know more, read my story. Your unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll. Where is the third thing? Asked Utterson. Here, sir. Poole picked up a thick envelope from the floor and gave it to the lawyer. Utterson put it in his pocket. Let's say nothing about this yet, he said. All right, sir, said Poole. If the doctor has escaped, we can perhaps save his good name, said Mr. Utterson. It is 10 o'clock now. I must go home and read these papers in a quiet place. But I will be back before midnight, and then we will send for the police. They went out, locking the door of the workroom behind them. Goodbye, Poole, said Mr. Utterson. Goodbye, sir, said Poole. And thank you. Utterson walked home. There he read the 2 papers which explained the mystery.
So it looks like we're about to reach the ending of our story. We have 3 more chapters to read, but we understand now that Dr. Jekyll has disappeared, alive or murdered. We're not sure of that, but we know that Mr. Hyde is finally dead. It seems like he was able to survive only by using a certain chemical, and when he ran out of that chemical, his body couldn't take it and he died. It's a good thing that we know now that the story of Mr. Hyde and all his crimes has ended with his death. But what is worrying now is the mystery of Dr. Jekyll's disappearance, the note that Dr. Lanyon has left, and the envelope that Mr. Utterson has found, and the change in the will that all the belongings of Dr. Jekyll now goes to Mr. Utterson instead of Mr. Hyde. So, in order to learn more and answer more questions, let's go further in the story to chapter 11 under the title Dr. Lanyon's Story.
Dr. Lanyon's Story. On the 9th of January, 4 days ago, I, Dr. Hasty Lanyon, received a letter in the evening post. My name and address on the envelope were in the handwriting of my old school friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll. I was surprised by this because we did not often write. We met often for dinner, and I could not think of anything important enough for a letter. This was the letter.
9th of December, 1881. Dear Lanyon, you are one of my oldest friends. If one day you ever say to me, Jekyll, my life, my good name, my mind are in danger, I will do everything to help you. Now, Lanyon, my life, my good name, and my mind are all in great danger. If you don't help me tonight, I am finished. I ask you to do this after you have read this letter. Drive straight to my house. Poole, my servant, is waiting for you. He will take you to the door of the room above my workroom. I want you to go in alone. Open the cupboard with the letter E on the left. Break the lock if necessary. Pull out the fourth drawer from the top. Inside it, there are some chemicals, a bottle, and a notebook. Please take the drawer to your house. At midnight, please be alone in your office. A man will come. Give him the drawer. That is all that I ask you to do. 5 minutes after that, you will understand how important this is to me. I do not believe that you will fail me. I am sure that you will do this. With all my thanks, H.J.
I was sure that the doctor was mad, but until that was proved, I had to complete his request. I got a taxi and went immediately to Jekyll's house. The servant was waiting there for me. He too had a letter with his orders from Dr. Jekyll. The cupboard with the letter E on it was not locked. I took out the drawer, covered it with a cloth, and brought it back to my house. Again, I looked at the things in the drawer. They were what Jekyll described, but it soon became clear that the chemicals were prepared by Jekyll and not by a chemist. I opened one of the packets and found something white. It looked like salt, but it wasn't. I next looked at a small bottle of blood-red liquid. I opened it, and it smelled very strongly. I could not name the smell, but it was very unpleasant. There was very little in the notebook except dates. There was sometimes a word or two after the date. Double is an example, and once, early in the list, completely failed. I could only guess their meanings. How did these things help me to do anything for the life, the good name, or the mind of the doctor? It looked like the work of a madman. And why couldn't Jekyll's messenger go to Jekyll's house and get these things? I thought, why did I have to go for him? I sent my servants to bed, and at midnight I was waiting alone in my office with the drawer and a gun. There was a quiet knock at the door. I opened it. I found a small man trying to stay in the dark shadows. "Are you from Dr. Jekyll?" I asked. He made a noise that I understood as yes. I told him to come in. He saw a policeman come into the square on the far side, and he fearfully hurried inside. This worried me a little, and I kept my hand on the gun in my pocket. I took him into the bright light of the office, and there I studied my visitor. He was a stranger to me. He was small, as I have said, and ugly. And I noticed that I had a very strong feeling of dislike and sickness. His clothes were expensive and very well made, but they were too big for him. Unusually, that did not amuse me. He was worried and excited at the same time. "Have you got it?" he cried. "Have you got it?" He put his hand on my arm to shake me. I pushed it off. "You forget, sir," I said, "that we have not met in the usual way. Please sit down." "I am very sorry, Dr. Lanyon," he said. He sat down. "You are quite right. Your friend, Dr. Henry Jekyll, sent me here on an important piece of business, and I understand that a drawer—" I pointed to the drawer. "There it is, sir," I said. He jumped out of his seat and almost ran to it. Then he stopped suddenly and put his hand over his heart. His face was white, and I was afraid for his life and his mind. "You must be calm," I said. He gave me a terrible smile, picked up the drawer, and looked at the things in it. He saw that they were all there. Then he said to me, "Do you have a glass?" I gave him what he wanted. He put some of the liquid from the bottle into the glass. Then he put in some of the chemical and mixed the two together. The liquid seemed to get brighter and began to smell even more strongly than before. My visitor watched it closely. Then he put the glass down on the table. He looked at me carefully. "Now, will you be sensible?" he said. "Can I take this glass away without any questions, or must you have answers? Think carefully before you reply. I can leave now, or you can watch something terribly shocking." "I want to see the end of this," I said. "Lanyon," he said, "do you remember your promise when you became a doctor of medicine?" "This is a secret. Remember your promise and keep it a secret." He put the glass to his mouth and drank the liquid, all of it. I watched him. With a cry, he reached for the table and nearly fell down. His eyes opened wide, and strange noises came from his mouth. Then he began to change. He seemed to get bigger. His face suddenly went black, and parts of it moved like liquid. I was frightened, and I jumped back against the wall, away from him. I put a hand to my mouth. "Oh, God!" I heard myself crying again and again. There, in front of my eyes, pale and shaking, like a man back from death, there was Henry Jekyll. I just cannot write down the things that he told me in the next hour. I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. Now I ask myself, do I believe it? And I cannot answer that question. I cannot sleep. A terrible fear is with me every hour of every day and night. I cannot think about the evil man and the terrible things that he told me without fear. I know that I shall soon die, but I will die without understanding. I can only tell you one thing, Utterson. The evil person in my house that night was a man called Hyde, the murderer of Sir Danvers Carew, the man that every policeman in the country is looking for. Hasty Lanyon.
Okay, interesting, right? So now we know more information about our mystery here. We finally read the letter that Dr. Lanyon asked Mr. Utterson to keep until Dr. Jekyll disappears or dies. It here has the story of what happened that night in 9th of January. That 3 months before his disappearance, as Dr. Jekyll disappeared in March, he had an interesting episode of mystery happening at Dr. Lanyon's house. It seems that Dr. Henry Jekyll was like invented this strange chemical that had an effect on him. It seems unbelievably that this chemical had an effect on him that changed him to Mr. Hyde. Is it so, or this is unbelievable for us to understand? This is what we're going to learn in the following chapters. But now, let's go over our question page and recap what we've learned today through some questions. So here are some questions that we're going to answer regarding what we read in chapters 10 and 11. These are sentences, but they work as definitions to some glossaries that we learned throughout the story. So let's read the sentences and find their meanings from the story. When there is no noise, so when everything is calm and quiet, what do we hear? Do we hear anything? No. There is, yes, you're right, there is silence. So the first word is silence. B, you give these when you tell somebody to do something for you. So when Dr. Jekyll wanted his servants to do anything, he ordered them. Excellent. So it's orders. The orders, you give it to someone in order to make something for you. C, a thing you use to close a door. Okay, what do you use? You use a lock. Very good. Okay, now let's think about number D. To put something in a place so that nobody can find it. Yes, it's right. You hide it. Very good. What is another word for crazy? Exactly. It's mad. Okay, so number F, to make somebody think that something is funny. Yes, to make someone laugh, it's amuse. We have a verb here, another verb for entertain. Okay, G, the opposite of narrow. They walk in the wide streets. Very good. And the last one, when your body is moving because you are frightened or cold, you, yes, excellent, you shake. That's excellent. So these are the new vocabulary words that we have in these chapters. And we will continue next lesson with the last two chapters of the story. I hope you enjoy it and see you next lesson.